Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion of the Open University Research Sessions 2021, August, organized by the Center for Gender Equity and Equality of the Open University of Sri Lanka. The title of the panel discussion today is Post-Pandemic Higher Educational Experiences and Gender Inequality. To present an introduction to the theme, let me begin by saying that the impact of the COVID-19 on school and higher educational experiences is a topic that has received global attention. However, attention on this topic, considering its social and emotional aspects, is much less popular and sporadic globally as well as here in Sri Lanka. Inquiries on how the post-pandemic higher educational experiences intersect with traditionally marginalized and vulnerable segments of society and their everyday lives, and in this particular context, gender is negligible and scarce. The relative pressure the post-pandemic situation has caused women and girls, that includes students, academics, non-academic staff members, or rather non-teaching staff in higher education, should be well understood due to their roles as primary caregivers and mothers with a huge bulk of domestic duties and emotional labor to perform in an aggravated context of work-life balancing. This panel discussion hence aims to focus on these areas in order to create awareness and for better higher educational outcomes. So let me introduce you to the distinguished expert panel of invitees who are taking part from overseas as well as from Sri Lanka, who have very kindly come on board to grace this very important discussion and the hours conference today. It is indeed a greatest honor and privilege for me to introduce these extremely eminent academics to the audience. Let me start by introducing Emeritus Professor Kalinga Tudor Silva. He holds Bachelor of Arts from the University of Peradeniya and PhD from Monash University, Australia. He served as the Executive Director of the Center for Poverty Analysis from 2001 to 2002 and Executive Director of the International Center for Ethnic Studies from 2007 to 2008. He is Professor Emeritus at the University of Peradeniya, where he served in various capacities, including the Dean, Faculty of Arts, as the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Network in Social Science and Health from 2000 to 2002. He contributed to the development of health social sciences in the larger Asia Pacific region. And he also he has authored several books and very prestigious publications. To quote a couple of those, Vatta Delers, a sociological study of urban low-income communities in Sri Lanka, University Press of America, Lanham, MD, 1991. Decolonization, Development and Disease, A Social History of Malaria in Sri Lanka, Orient Black Swan, Delhi, 2014. And Checkpoint Temple Church and Mosque, the Collaborative Ethnographic of War and Peace, Pluto Press, London, 2015. Currently, he serves as the chief editor of the Sri Lanka Journal of Social Sciences, published by the National Science Foundation of Sri Lanka. Let me now introduce eminent Associate Professor Victoria Shounmi, Associate Professor, Institute of Education, University College of London. Her research interests are gender, class, identity, and race. And her strong career profile reflects this with research outputs in these areas. She has developed strong networks internationally in these research areas, in part through memberships of AERA, BERA, BELMAS, and NWSA. She has been the principal investigator for girls, women's experience in education and the workplace. In addition to her faculty and consulting experiences across the UK, Dr. Shounmi has also served as an international visiting professor with a DAD scholarship at Hochschule Fulda in Germany, where she developed and taught seminars on critical whiteness, gender, and leadership in Black feminism. She led, co-developed, and taught a MA module entitled Culturally Competent Leadership and Cross-Cultural Communication, and ran a series of international panels at the University College London Institute of Education and in England. She has held a range of senior leadership positions within local authorities and in both the public and voluntary sectors in areas including higher and further education. Furthermore, her corporate experiences as a senior management consultant, along with owning her own business, has given her exposure to customer-oriented and real knowledge in the competitive research environment. So welcome, Professor Tudor Silva and Professor Victoria Shounmi. And now may I introduce you to the third panelist, Professor Anastasia Sabaniotou. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that name a bit weird. Is a professor at the Department of Chemical Engineering of the Engineering School of Aristotle, University of Thessaloniki, Greece. She holds a PhD and master's from École Centrale de Paris, France. She has worked at the European Commission in Brussels in the Directorate General for Research and Technological Development. She is the elect Vice President of the Mediterranean Engineering Schools Network and represents the Aristotle University at the top international managers and engineers network based at École Centrale de Paris, France. She chairs biomass and bioenergy at the International Renewable Energy Network, REN, WREN, and she is a founding member of the Chinese Bioenergy and Environment Network. She's a member of the Gender Equality Committee at the Aristotle University, Thessaloniki, founding member of the Gender Equality and Sustainable Development Committee of the Engineering School of the Aristotle University, Thessaloniki, member of the Greek Government Center for Women's Innovation, and the Gender Equality Group leader at the Mediterranean Engineering Schools Network. Her research team has been awarded 15 times for excellence and innovation. In 2018, she was awarded in London for her scientific contribution and pioneering in bioenergy issues by the International Renewable Energy Network, WREN. In 2019, she is awarded by the Aristotle University for her international recognition and collaborations. In 2021, she has been included in the list of the world's most cited scientists as published by Stanford University. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Professor Anastasia. And last but not least, let me quickly introduce Dr. Tara DeMel, who is the moderator of the session, who holds MBBS, MPhil from the University of London and MD research. Dr. Tara DeMel was a senior lecturer in physiology at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo until 1996, after which she served as director, Sri Lanka Foundation Institute. During the years 1997 to 2005, she served as advisor to the President on Social Infrastructure, Vice Chairperson for the National Education Commission, and Secretary to the Ministry of Education and Higher Education. She steered the work of presidential task forces on general education, university education, and tertiary and vocational education. She served 2 terms as a member of the board of the Commonwealth of Learning in Vancouver. Since 2017, she has been responsible for designing programs for mindfulness in schools and mindfulness with values and ethics education, and testing the impact of mindfulness in school children. She has been a member of the Global Consultative Group of Mindfulness Initiative UK since 2018. She's currently co-founder Education Forum Sri Lanka and Mindful Educators Sri Lanka, and she is a member of the Worldwide Commission to Educate All Kids Post-Pandemic. In August 2019, she received National Honours Sri Lanka Sikhamani. May I now call upon Dr. Tara DeMel to take over and conduct the discussion as the expert moderator. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Kanchana. Good afternoon to all colleagues from Sri Lanka, and a very good morning to our co-panelists and friends from the western part of the world. So in order to moderate this session efficiently and effectively so that we have as many interesting ideas coming out and to have a vibrant discussion, I would like to appeal for 2 things. Firstly, for everyone who is not speaking to kindly mute your microphones. During the discussion, when I invite you to ask your questions, kindly raise your hand, and at that point only, kindly unmute your mic. But after you finish asking the question, kindly mute your mic once more. So this is how the session will go. We have a stellar panel, as Kanchana very beautifully explained. So the 3 panelists will perform in this way. I will first invite them for round 1, where each one of them will give their opinion on more or less a preliminary input to this particular topic for 15 minutes each. At the end of the 15 minutes, I will invite the audience to ask questions from them. In the manner I said, kindly raise your hand, make your questions very brief so that as many people as possible can ask questions and we have a vibrant discussion. At the end of round one, the round one discussion would last a maximum of 20 minutes. We go into round two, where again, I will be inviting the panelists to make their interventions of 10 minutes each, followed again by a similar discussion. The final round would be where there'll be a wrap up where each of the panelists will give their opinion or any kind of clarifications in 10 minutes each, and that final round will not be followed by a discussion. So that's how it will go. So I'm keeping clock with me just to time so that none of us go out of time and that everybody is able to participate. It is approximately 2 minutes past 2 now. When I start inviting the panelists and we start the process going, 2 hours and 15 minutes from that time, approximately 3:15, maybe close to 3:30, we will wind up this discussion as instructed by Kanchana, keeping to time. I just want to recall what happened in March 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic hit. Let's talk for 1 minute on the school education system, where in 192 countries, all schools were shuttered. Even during World War II, all schools were not shuttered, ousting nearly 1.6 billion with a B, ousting nearly 1.6 billion children from school. When the months went by, wave after wave, the pandemic hit and rolled on us. The COVID learning losses piled high, with less than 35% of the global population of school children having access to some form of reasonable internet connection and reasonable devices. So the lost COVID generation was a term that came into the nomenclature of global educationists and international agencies, particularly those from the UN. So educationists around the world they're still grappling with this crisis, racing to mitigate it and to prevent a global catastrophe in learning. So just to quote the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, we are at a defining moment for the world's young people and children. Decisions taken by governments and ministers now will have a lasting impact on development prospects and hundreds and millions of young people around the world for decades to come, the pandemic leading to the largest disruption in education and learning ever. We face a generational catastrophe and a huge waste of human potential, undermining decades of progress. And that is what the UN Secretary General said a few months ago. At the beginning of the pandemic, this is what he predicted, again, the UN Secretary General, the pandemic will not only deal a devastating blow to school children, but also a severe blow with devastating social and economic consequences for women and girls. So with that, I just want to ask the 3 panelists. We are going to start with Professor Victoria, thereafter Professor Tudor, and then Professor Anastasia. We want to ask, how does the undergraduate education, the academia, that is concerning universities and higher education institutions globally, how did female undergraduates, how did female academics and non-academic staff face the pandemic up to now in terms of what I mentioned, in the context of what I mentioned in the school system? Have female academics and undergraduates suffered more, suffered less, or suffered the same amount? And what are your comments about the dropouts from a higher education sector, particularly in relation to females, since March 2020? So with that, I'm going to pause and invite Professor Victoria to start for 15 minutes to giving us an input in relation to what I mentioned just now. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much. So I think I've got somebody who's going to do my slides. So if they can do slide number 1, I think that's how it's going to work. Is that going to happen? Oh, fantastic. So if you do it on, can you put it on slideshow at the top there? Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, really appreciate that. I know I'm now doing 15 minutes. I'm going to take it slightly off key, but on key. So I've called my particular presentation, it's about the experiences of Black women working during COVID-19. And when I say working, I'm going to put working in kind of, I suppose, italics, because it can be working or studying during COVID-19. So let's move to the next slide, please. Now, I use this picture because I think it's really, I think it's, first of all, it's a beautiful animal. And secondly, it's a black swan. And black swan, you don't see many black swans. And when they are in the mix of all white swans, people perhaps see that the black swan is something which is just different and doesn't belong. And I think that really is going to be an element of the talk I want to talk about, really. I describe myself many ways as a black swan within the academic, within academia, I describe myself as that. And I think when we think about the experience of Black women during COVID-19, I think very much so, this was part of our being, is it showed a lot of inequalities. Can I move on to the next slide, please? This was something, and I'm talking about the UK because I didn't travel only once, I think, in 2020. So as we start off with the pandemic and how it started to emerge in March 2020 and what took place, it was a slow and a gradual creeping into the United Kingdom and really kind of trying to get a mind around it. But what was quite apparent and quite stark was this, what I've just put a slide on here. I don't want to come across as racist, but shouldn't you perhaps get off this tram? So when people started to realize that there was something that they needed to be nervous about, it became the positioning of blame to a particular group of people, which at that particular time were an Asian community, which of course Chinese or Japanese or South Korean, whatever they thought, was not white, but at the same time was connected with perhaps what they thought this particular virus, because they didn't know any better. So that was something which I think started off a whole wave of discussion and different behaviors. We move to the next slide, please. So what was going on? Now, one of the things which I think the United Kingdom perhaps engages with is that when America catches a cold, Black people get the flu. So in 2020, when America catches coronavirus, Black people die. Blacks in almost every state within racial data available have higher contraction rates and higher death rates from COVID-19. So what we started to see very quickly is that certain people were dying quicker than others within the Western world. Can we move to the next slide, please? Some of the statistics which I'd like to share with you. Now, some of the terms which are used in here, which is Black, Asian, minority, and ethnic, which is BAME. I mean, we're not really using that term anymore, but I just wanted to put that on there. So when you see on here that across England, and I'm saying England, 3 times higher. So particular groups of people which are Black and Asian and minority ethnic were 3 times higher in dying. Black African were 3.24 times higher in dying. Pakistani, 3.29. Bangladesh, 2.41. Black Caribbean, 2.21. Unfortunately, I haven't got the statistics on Sri Lankan. And Indian, 1.71. Now, this was also to do with the different exposures to the risk. And BAME, Black and Asian minority ethnic people, were more likely to work in jobs with higher risk of exposure and more likely to use public transport. And also diabetes and obesity was something else which they started to connect to why such high levels of death. Let's move to the next slide. That gives you a little bit of context. Now, when we focus on Black women and what started to happen on Black women, with Black women, is that Black women were facing an overwhelming mental health crisis. Coronavirus disease in 2019 had burgeoned into a pandemic that highlights the countless social and health disparities that have existed in Black communities within the United States for centuries and in the United Kingdom. So these types of things were starting to come to the surface overwhelmingly. Let's move to the next slide, please. Some recent research which was done and at Harvard University found that Black women were 4 times more likely to die of COVID than white men. The data also revealed that Black women are 3 times more likely to die of virus than Asian men. Why was this? The rate of COVID deaths of Black and white women are so starkly different that researchers question how influential gender alone truly is on the virus outcomes. Their explanation, it is well understood that racism and social inequalities, not genetics, are responsible for racial disparities in COVID-19 mortality. However, many researchers focus on differences in biology to explain the sex disparity in COVID-19 mortality. And I put those points up there because, you know, as a Black woman, we fall down the cracks on both things. We've got gender, which is mostly looking at white women. And then we've got the issues around ethnicity or Blackness, which is mostly looking at Black men. And then Black women fall right down the cracks of where we come into this. Let's move on to the next slide, please. I pull out some different images, which I think are really helpful in this. On this one here, you can see there's a crowd here, and it says racism is a public health crisis. Hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion or debate around some of that as I move on. Let's move to the next slide. So the psychological toll. I mentioned earlier that the mental health crisis is something which we're dealing with. And with our under 18s within England, ethnic minorities, Black and ethnic minorities were seeking help for anxiety or stress, and it increased by 11.4%. Suicidal thoughts went up by 26% compared to their white counterparts of 18.1%. Depression for whites under 18 reporting depression fell, whereas it rose for Black and ethnic minority. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? There was a high risk of Black and ethnic minority dying, which I've mentioned already, and 44% more Black and ethnic minority children and young people sought advice from COOS, which is an online counselling service, during March, April, and May, year 2020. Let's move on to the next slide, please. I like this picture because it says it looks at racism is a virus. And I think it's really useful to unpack what that means. And you've got pictures of Black women here because I wanted to show Black women and what we're talking about. We also have this notion of shadism, which I know happens in all different parts of the world, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's Pakistan, China. There's this notion of how light you are and how nearer to white you are, and that doesn't happen to you. Racism is a virus, and I think that's something we have to acknowledge and understand. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So going back to the experiences of Black women, there's been multiple causes of inequality. Black young people suffering the most in this COVID-19, whether it's to do with the lack of access to health, whether it's a lack of access to being able to study online, which is something I'll talk about in a little bit longer if I've got the time, or I'll talk about the next part. The least able to socially distance because of where they were living. So if you're living in a high-rise flat with no access to parks or any kind of spaces which enables you to go out and about, that's one thing. Or you're living in an overcrowded part of the city, there's that as well. Bangladeshi and Pakistani and Blacks lost many loved ones. So many children, young people, there was somebody in their family which was lost by COVID-19. I've mentioned lack of accessibility and also poverty. Poverty was in itself interchangeable to being a Black, part of Black community. Concerns on predicted grades and links. That was something which was very stark within the university and schools. What was going to happen when all the exams were cancelled? All the exams in the United Kingdom were cancelled. And what did that mean? It meant also we started to look at the starkness of expectations of teachers, and the lack of perhaps cultural awareness, and how the power is in a pen for teachers. And that can itself, one stroke, can make or break a young person. The lack of historical understanding came very much forward, and many books were read as part of being locked down on relation to race and inequality and the experiences of Black women. Move on to the next slide, please. How much time have I got, please? A couple more minutes.
Just about 2 to 3 minutes more.
Okay,
maximum.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I can do the rest of the slides at another time. I think what I'd like to leave you with is the uncomfortable facts. Blackness puts you at a disadvantage. And I think that's a really important point for us to look at. So 94% of UK doctors who have died from COVID are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, 94%. Black and Asian women increased risk of dying during pregnancy versus white women. Social economic inequalities increased risk at work and culture factors. And the pushback on the term BAME and the untanglement of the term as the experiences are very, very different. I think I've got time for one more slide, which I can move to the next slide, please. Black women in particular are facing challenges financially, physically, and mentally during that time, which is unprecedented time, but also now as we recover, and between serving as frontline workers, being concerned about contracting the virus, contributing to their families financially, and worrying about their loved ones' health. Black women are experiencing great strain on their mental health and well-being. And maybe when we move into the next discussion, I will talk about how this impacts on children and young women which are in the university sector and also in schools. I needed to give you context, and that's why I did it that particular way. Okay, don't worry about the other slides. I'll use them later. Thank you very much, Tara.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for that brilliant exposition on the Black Swan effect. Gives a lot of reminiscing moments in terms of Sri Lanka and how we face the pandemic in relation to minority issues as well. I'm going to swiftly move over to Professor Tudor. Professor Tudor, are you ready with your mic unmuted?
Yes, I'm ready.
Please take 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tara. First of all, I must say I'm very happy to be part of this discussion. I come from a background in sociology. I'm an I'm not an educationist, but I'm an educator. And right now, actually, I'm involved in teaching at the postgraduate level. So I will use that experience to describe the current situation in Sri Lanka. In the first round, as Tara calls these sessions, I will actually talk more about the Sri Lankan education system. And in the second round, I will talk more about how it has been impacted by the pandemic. The first point I want to make is that education is a highly valued subject in Sri Lanka, valued in the sense that everybody wants to actually benefit from education. And it is, and this applies to both men and women, boys and girls. So everybody wants to go through education. And education is a very major activity in the country. Now, if you look at the statistics, we have a population of about 21 million people in the country. Out of them, 4.4 million children are in the school system. So that is almost like 20% of the total population. But then if you also include the parents of these children, that will constitute a very large section of the population. And moreover, there are other livelihoods which are very closely connected with the education. Of course, there is a very large population of teachers. We have about, I think, 250,000 school teachers in our country. Out of them, according to a recent estimate, about 70% are female teachers. So it's a largely process in some ways, driven by female teachers as well. And then also I must mention that when you look at the breakdown of school children, I'm talking about the primary, secondary education here. Of the 4.13 million children, 2.05 million are boys, 2.09 are girls. So girls are in the majority in the school system and also in the teaching profession. So that is an important point that we have to bear in mind when we look at the education system in the country. The other point I want to mention is Sri Lanka is one country where we have what we call universal free education introduced into our system from 1960s onwards. So we have a free education accessible to all sectors of society from year one onwards, right up to the end of the first degree in the university. And I think Sri Lanka would be one of the few developing countries who offer this service. So this is something that we have to take into account. And of course, Sri Lanka is known for its welfare policies, welfare state policies. And Laksari Jayasuriya, who is an authority on Sri Lankan welfare state, introduced in one of his writings that education is one of the 4 pillars of the welfare state in Sri Lanka, other pillars being free healthcare and subsidized transport and things like that. So actually there is a very strong value of equity in education right from the beginning. So as a result, whenever the state tries to privatize education in one way or the other, there is always a strong round of protest on the part of undergraduate students who are part of the university education system. So there is a strong notion of equity connected with education, and we may also have to explore how this plays out in the wake of the pandemic. And I will talk about it in detail a little later in my next session. And the third point I want to mention is that, education is very much the goal of poor, rich, everybody, children from all backgrounds in the country, even though they always don't make it to the top of education. And even though we have a kind of free education system, it goes side by side with private tuition system, whereby actually many students, many school children, even though they don't have to pay money for their education, normal education, they do have to pay money for tuition masters, and access to tuition would be one important thing that we have to consider here. So these are some important background information that I'd like to start with. Let me just quickly take up 3 points related to the gender impact of COVID-19 on education. I will elaborate these 3 points in more detail later in the discussion. The first point is, actually the whole system has switched to online education since the onset of the pandemic. Since last year, the whole education system switched to online mode, so that means that people have to have access to the devices and also internet to take part in this all important education process. So this is where we have a serious problem. I think where gender comes into play is, how the limited devices available at the household level is shared among different children, among boys and girls, and also adult members of the family, is something that we have to actually look at. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of reliable quantitative information on this subject at the moment, but I will refer to information that is available. In Sri Lanka, the mobile phone access is pretty good. According to national statistics, we have almost 1.5 mobile phones per person in the country. And this includes children. But however, most mobile phones will not have internet access. So in that sense, it will not be very useful in in accessing education in this difficult time. And the second point I want to stress is the multiple roles of women, especially in the pandemic situation, where women have to work from home. Now I'm actually working a lot with older women who are married and who have young children, especially as postgraduate students. And often they have to play multiple roles at home, especially working from home, because during the pandemic, in most places, they introduced the practice of working from home, which actually increase the burden of women because they have to work from home, they have to look after their children, they have to look after elderly parents at the same time, and at the same time, they have to receive higher education. So this is where we have a serious problem, and that is something that maybe we need to address more carefully in our interventions in the country. The third point I want to mention, and I will again elaborate this a little bit more in my next round, presentation in the next round. The poor internet access, especially in the rural areas, has been a very serious problem in Sri Lanka. Children actually climb trees, tall trees, to get access to internet, because they think that that is the only way they can access. And in some cases, children might even get on roofs, get on attics of houses, in order to make sure that they have at least slight internet access, so that they can take part in the education process. This is where gender stereotypes play a very big role, because in Sri Lanka, women are not encouraged to climb trees. Maybe the situation is different in Greece and other parts of the world, but one of the gender stereotypes in Sri Lanka is that women, they're not encouraged to climb trees. So in this instance, where children have to actually climb trees to get internet access, girls obviously they have a problem because they just don't have the skill to climb trees. So this is something that is quite important in the countryside, in more remote areas where internet access is weak. So anyway, the whole issue of gender stereotypes and how they are constructed at home and in schools, in spite of the fact that vast majority of the teachers in the school system are females, in some ways, the education system also tend to contribute to the gender stereotyping. So this is also something that we need to explore more closely, maybe in the next round of my presentation. Thank you very much. So I just gave a background to the education system in Sri Lanka, and I will build on it in the next round.
Thank you very much, Professor Tudor, for keeping to time. Just to add one line to what is said, the last computer survey done in Sri Lanka in 2019 showed actually that less than 34% of the school-age population had access to internet, and less than 30% had access to devices like tabs and laptops and so on. So what you said makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much once again. And now I'm going to invite Professor Anastasia to take the platform, and please keep to 15 minutes, Professor. Thank you very much. You're on mute, Anastasia.
Okay.
Can you...
Sorry. It's okay now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Oh, what I wanted to say is, first of all, to thank you, Tara, to thank you, the organizing committee, for inviting me to take part in this wonderful meeting, in this wonderful conference. And I want to congratulate you for the excellent organization and communication. That was really excellent. Congratulations. And I like all the topics. I like this conference that is interdisciplinary. And because, as you can see here, I'm coming from the engineering domain, and this is somehow different. I'm coming, as it was announced, from Greece, from the University of Greece, but as the vice president of the network of engineering schools in Mediterranean region, I want to bring here the experience and the insight we gain from the impact COVID-19 had on women in academia in the Mediterranean countries. So I will bring you here the experience from another part of the world, which is Mediterranean region. And as you know, Mediterranean region is very diverse. We have the countries in the north that are European countries, Spain, France, Italy, Greece. And in this region, we have the countries of the south that are African countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt. And in this region, we have the countries of Asia, so 3 continents, Middle East countries, Palestine, Lebanon, Turkey, Israel. So I want to bring the insights and the experience that we got during this pandemic, because we used to work and to continue to work on a project that was funded by the European Commission, and this is the Target project, and that was exactly how to transform the higher education institution toward gender equality, and how this pandemic has impacted this transformation. So in this first session of my presentation, the first 15 minutes of my presentation, I will focus mostly on the side that we had on 3 levels, and I will speak focusing on 3 levels. First, this will be the new era of digitalization in the universities and what impact this COVID had on this, and what are the negative and the positive insights of this impact. The second, I want to discuss about a great awareness that took place this time of lockdown and crisis, in not to everybody, but to many people, and especially to our environmental teaching courses, where we have students that they have to understand better the planet and the ecology. And the third level will be the gender equality or inequality in academia, since I'm coming from academia and I work on this. So let's start. And in the second part, which is 10 minutes, I will discuss how we can really benefit of the lesson that we have taken from this pandemic, from this crisis, and what we have to do in universities in policy making. So we speak about the pandemic, of virus-19 pandemic that started as a virus, simple virus, and became pandemic very quickly and spread all around the globe and created a crisis. So we live under a crisis. Crisis is a Greek word. You use a Greek word when you speak about crisis, and means challenge, assessment of the challenge, and opportunity. And here I want to stress the importance of this duality in this meaning of crisis. We have a challenge, but we don't stop in the challenge. We have to look at the opportunities that come from the lesson learned from this challenge. And there I want to stress my importance, not only to speak about the problem, but to see how we can benefit of the lesson learned and to make a change or to make changes at all levels, but I will speak in universities. So the first acts of my presentation will be the digitalization and how this pandemic and how what was the impact of the digital remote learning and teaching, because as COVID-19 spread as pandemic, immediately everywhere in the globe, we had the closure of universities, closure of schools, people stay at home, work at home, live at home, interact at home. And so the social space now, it's the home space, it's the family space. And then the way of interacting with each other, it's a digital way. We see each other in the internet, we see each other in the Zoom, and we work like this to teach, and students learn like this. So what is the impact of this and where we're going? Because now we see that universities, they go towards more digital learning. We are going toward the digitalization era. We did a survey in the Mediterranean schools, and we did a survey asking exactly things about the digital remote learning. And we have many answers from students and from faculty members. When we speak about the European Mediterranean countries, the North Mediterranean countries, like France, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, then here we had no problem. Universities, they were prepared immediately, very quickly, and this is amazing how fast these transitions have made to the digital remote learning. So everybody adapted easily because already we had all this platform in the universities. So we had laptops, we had internet at home. So we adapted, and students, they adapted easily. Where there were problems with this it was in the African countries or in the less developed countries or the poor areas, agriculture areas, especially in Tunisia and Algeria, in these countries where there were no internet connection, or students, some of the students, they had no infrastructure or even teachers there. So it was very difficult for them to participate in the teaching of courses. And there is the problem. As it was mentioned by previous speaker, in agricultural poor areas where the network is interrupted or does not exist, and where the infrastructure for doing and the platforms for doing all this, it was limited. Another impact, negative impact that concern all countries, Mediterranean countries, and I speak here especially for STEM and engineering, for science and engineering, but for medicine as well. It was that the lack of experience students had because they lost the laboratories and the practical exercises, the hands-on projects that we work on, and the internships, because being in engineering school and educated there, you have to learn more practice things. So you have to be in laboratories, to work there, to do internships with companies, to like in the medicine, for example, you have clinics. So all of these are restricted. Imagine how much knowledge was limited. We try to remediate this by doing videos, video scoping the laboratory, but it's not as effective as a real physical presence collaboration. And internships and moving mobility abroad and mobility in the country, mobility with the companies and everything was very limited. In the beginning, okay, online could be done. Instructors and students that got tired. You get tired. How many students you can accept in your company and instruct them? Students, how many courses they can follow? I mean, we have this Erasmus program and everything, but we cannot. Mobility so was limited. So all of these, there were really difficulties and negative aspects, but the most important aspect was this side effect that this isolation had for the young people. Imagine you are young people and you are isolated at home. You are first year students, and you don't know your university. You are entered the university under very difficult exams, because we have really difficult exams to the university here in France and everywhere. And then you don't know your professor. You never saw him. You never saw your room, your university, nothing. And you stay at home and you do courses. So the mental health and this mental side effect of many young people, and not only, was increased. This is another side effect. So many these negative issues, but we have to be right and fair. They were positive issues. For example, we had work flexibility, zero committing time. You stayed at home. You had no time to go, to take the bus, to take the car, to go there. More independence to decide how you work, when you work night, day. You could access large amount of information because there were so many webinars, and you were students and teachers and everybody able, or if had time, to follow any kind of webinars and to participate like we do now. I'm in Greece and I participate in Sri Lanka, even though I say I would like to visit physically Sri Lanka, which I like very much. And it happens to be there in 2019 for the Renewable Energy Conference. The other positive is flexibility in place of living. So we have many people that lived in their country, they lived the country of study and they went to their country of origin. They lived in their house in the countryside where they were more free. But this digitalization and this way of work needs to develop skills, other skills. And here is the point. We need to develop more soft skills, to develop stronger personal responsibility in deciding when, where, how to learn and how to learn. We need to be better organized in order to do this work online, to have higher degree of discipline and planning, because you have to successfully complete the course, the meetings, research work, project, studies. But all this, they need as well credibility. And this credibility is needed by the people, by the instructor, by student, and by the platforms themselves. So these are very important. All these things, negative and positive, and we have to balance this. And we have to take lessons and to see how we go. But finally, when I ask all this in the survey, how they prefer to be the future, they would like to have a conference online, they would like to have teaching and learning online. They said, no, we prefer physical, but let's take it hybrid. We prefer some online courses, but where there is interaction with people, we prefer this to be physical. Now I go to the second act of my presentation, which it's another insight that we got. And the insight is the awareness. And when I say awareness of that we are in an interconnected system, that the whole planet, it's an interconnected system, and we humans, we're interconnected with the nature, with each other. So this was shown very well by the COVID that was born in China, and then in some months, in some days, the whole planet was affected, and the whole planet was dancing the same dance. So we are interconnected. And we are interconnected in the system of planet, of our nature and humans. So if we want to heal the planet, if we want to heal the societies, if we want to increase the resilience of societies and ecological sustainability, then we have to work healing ourselves and working all together and feeling inside that this interconnection and this systemic approach is very important. This awareness makes a shift in the way that we think. Maybe not to everybody, but my experience in the engineering school, because we used to speak about sustainability to education, about sustainable development, about sustainable development goals for engineers, then future engineers or scientists and managers, that they have to think or to learn and how to take decisions, how to make proposals. This was a shift, and we used this shift in teaching. And this, I think, is the big gain, that now we can think differently and we can heal the planet and we can coexist in peace with love and caring. Caring for the more vulnerable and creating resilience for the more vulnerable as well. So that was a very, very, very strong insight that the lockdown, that the virus created. Because thinking about the virus and this interconnection, and if you think deeper, then you can feel all of this that I'm saying, this awareness. Now I will go to the last axe of my presentation, gender equality. As it was stated before by the previous speaker, this COVID brought to the light the inequalities. As Victoria said, and Tudor said, yes, because before the inequalities were there, but they were for the unequal, for the vulnerable. The strong one, they never thought about this, and they never felt about this. But now with this crisis, any inequality, social, gender, economical, ecological, whatever, came to the light. And now we can speak about this, and we have to take measures and strategies towards this. It's very important. I will focus on gender inequality, and especially in academia, which is very luxurious, maybe level, but because I come from there and we studied this. With the survey that we did, again, we had some results, and these results, by asking women faculty members, academic or work in the university, or researcher, a young research PhD student, how they think that this lockdown impacted them, and if they saw inequalities there, or if they realize inequality, gender equality in the university, that previous maybe did not realize, and now they realize. All of them realized. Everybody realized the inequality. Because the social distancing and lockdowns associated with the pandemic crisis put pressure in the work-life balance a lot, especially in the Mediterranean countries, which I speak now about. But it's the same as in Sri Lanka, as Toder stated. The close of schools, the increased childcare, and the schooling at home, this created a lot of took a lot of time from women, academic women, that they stay at home. Of course, they gain time from not commuting to the university. They gain time not entering the classes, but they had to take care in home about children, about their schooling, about elderly, because in Mediterranean, these duties are on the hands of women. Not by tradition, by culture, not in all Mediterranean countries, but especially in the Arabic Maghreb countries of the North Asian and Middle East. So depending on the household composition and type, there were increased or less increased child care on the shoulders of women. They have an impact. This had an impact of the home production and the gender distribution of home production. And this is an unpaid work the women have to do there. So they lost some paid work from the university because they were not doing project or consultancy on other things, but they work more at home with an unpaid work. And this unpaid work has increased because they had to do schooling. And this is an unpaid care. They had to take care of parents. The scientific productivity of women academic and the PhD student has decreased, women, especially for young ones with small children. And we know very well that scientific productivity is what we need for the career development. And why it was decreased? Because women with children, they had not enough time to do papers or to do projects or to do teleconferences or to do collaboration or whatever. In some cases, they have no space at home. They have no special room where you need it.
Sorry, you're going ahead of your time.
They don't have this. So they need, and they cannot have the isolation that we need for doing this. The positive thing here is that this homework obliged some men, fathers, to share with women. And this forced behavior can be the natural behavior of the future. So I will close with 3 questions here, because this will be the introduction of my next presentation. And the question that we want to put to you, and I want to discuss in the next presentation, is how the current pandemic perpetuates existing gender injustice. Well, whether this can be mitigated through new caring social norms and soft leadership. How many of the shifts which have been forced through the pandemic will sustain and reshape how we will operate in the future? So these are my key questions, and we have to reply in this question. I will reply concerning the universities in the next presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. I think we will immediately go for the discussion after the first round. Like I said, the discussion will go on to something like 15 to 20 minutes. Participants who want to ask questions, kindly raise your hand so that we are able to see who would like to ask the question. And please make your question brief. And if you want to direct it to a panelist, kindly mention the name of the panelist so the panelist can unmute and be ready to answer your question. Over to the audience. Mr. Anton Pieratna. Yes,
Yeah,
Mr. Anton.
Dr.
unmute
Farah, yeah.
your-
So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So it seems all three presenters discuss about economic inequality and also technological inequality. So if it is the fundamental dimension, I just like to know with how can that be specifically create specific unequal treatment for women. Thank you.
Who would like to take that up? Victoria or Professor Tudor? Yes, Victoria.
Yeah, I'm happy to
Victoria,
say,
please.
yeah, thank you. I'm happy to say something, and I'm sure others will come through. If I'm correct with what you're saying, you're asking about whether the digital accessibility, why is it, what is it specifically linked to women? Is that what you're saying, Anton? Oh, maybe that's what he's saying. Okay, so what I would say about that is that within the United Kingdom, 46%, this 40%, there was a shift that 40%, 46% between rich and poor took place in England during and still the pandemic. So it widened. So if you've got young women, young girls and young women who are battling to have access to digital online processes, and depending on the household, some of the households perhaps would give more kudos to their young males than females. That's just one point, and I'm going to hand it back to somebody else.
Yes, Mr. Anton, you want to respond to what Victoria said? I just like to add one more thing to what Victoria said.
I'm happy about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to what Victoria said. I mean, in the Sri Lankan context, I think it's even more magnified. If you talk of livelihoods, low-income families' livelihoods, where actually the accent is on males and females have to work more in the field or more in places like the tea plantation sector or in homes where there is a lot of tension, women have to face the brunt of it, as Professor Tudor also emphasized. The inequality and the disparities become magnified because they have very much less chances to access even the sparse internet or the sparse devices available and access education. So I think this inequality actually favors in a negative way the women more than men. And I think that's universal, Anton. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. But I was raising this within the context of, right now, Sri Lankan government banned importing, technical devices, iPad, phones or tablets, that in that context, both men and women are really at, disadvantaged condition. I really accept, women are really, they are a special group. I accept that point, but in a broader context, a structural way, at the moment, by looking at the way how things happen in Sri Lanka, both men and women are affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton.
Can I make a quick comment?
Who is asking? I can't see you.
Tudor.
Yes, Tudor, please.
Yeah, please. I think, Anton, you make a valid point. Actually, the issue is, when households have a limited number of devices, let's say only one mobile phone with internet access, and there are 3 children in the household, all going through, let's say, online education at the same time, who will be given the opportunity to use that device? So this is where gender inequality comes into play. When scarce, I think your point about current restrictions on import is a valid one. It definitely affects both male and female, but the choice happens at the household level when the limited number of devices available has to be distributed among, 2 or 3 children in the family. I'm saying this because some of my students in my postgraduate classes actually mentioned this when it came to sharing, like a laptop or mobile phones within the household. Whose education is more valued is important here.
Thank you very much. I'm going to Mr. Milinda Mayadunna.
There are two questions. Yeah, Milinda.
I'm going to Milinda Mayadunna. Please unmute your mic, Milinda. Milinda, can you unmute your mic and ask your question? Also, Nipuni Ranavira, can you please unmute your mic and ask the question?
Thank you, Chairperson. This is part question, part comment. So what I wanted to say was that when discussing the impact of gender on the pandemic, I think we have to take into account this this particular culture or discourse of resilience and courage, which often
Thank you very much for
sorry.
the giving chance.
Please, can Nipuni continue her? Can I come back to Tilina later? Yes, thank you, Nipuni.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so what I was saying was that, there is often a culture of or discourse of resilience and courage that often centers around women. So you see this often touted in the media, and then, it creates a sort of an affective and emotional sort of burden on women to, make sure that things are all right at home, and that this culture of resilience and courage, and to make sure that that you put on a brave face and all that. So actually, yeah. So on the other hand, authorities also, for the most part, ignore the needs of women. For instance, when a lockdown is lifted for a particular, when there's sort of a half, a quasi getting back to normal circumstances, it's often that women are forced to go to work and conduct themselves as everything is under control, but in reality they might be actually encountering many issues at home. For instance, lack of daycare, lack of childcare, all that. So all this, I think you have to sort of take into this shift of responsibility, where these problems are perceived as personal, and where they are sort of shifted onto women. So that's the comment I want to make. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nipuni. Does any of the panelists want to respond to what Nipuni said in terms of women being expected to be more resilient and courageous, and they're expected to shoulder responsibility, and also even during lockdowns, they are the ones who are expected to go out and fend for the family, as it were.
I'm going to speak to that in my second presentation. So given that I think it's good to get more questions in, I'm going to address that in my next presentation. Okay.
Thank you. Any other responses to Nipuni Ranavira's comment? If not, I'm going to move on to Mr. Is Mr. Milinda Mayadunna still available with the hand raised? If not, to Mr. Or rather, Tilina Madiwala. Tilina Madiwala, are you available to? Yeah,
yes,
please go on.
Thank you, Professor Tara. Yeah, thanks. I just want to ask one question from Victoria, Professor Victoria, whether the percentages are out of a certain population, or what was the sample size of the study. And I really like to, thank Professor Tudor for bringing up the gender stereotyping. I think there was also a recent cartoon about how girls can't access digital, like rather online education, because they're not expected to climb trees in Sri Lanka. Another question that I want to ask from Professor Anastasia is, I really like that you brought up the unpaid care work. I think in patriarchal cultures where unpaid care work of women is equated to love towards family and spouse, how do we sort of overcome these challenges in recognizing unpaid care work, especially during a pandemic, and also whether we could look at intersectionalities among women when it comes to unpaid care work, because it's sort of like understood that only married women with children have to take over unpaid care work. But we have seen that during the pandemic, across the board, even whether you have children or not, whether irrespective of your marital status also, that has sort of impacted women. I would like to know what your thoughts are about that.
Thank you. I'm going to Victoria first.
So the actual the sample was around 2,000. They looked at 2,000 schools, and so the percentages are coming from that amount. So 2,000 schools, and they looked at that across. When I said 46%, the kind of the gap is 46% between rich and poor. That's based on the 2,000 schools. And also the other point is, well, there's quite a lot of other stats which that Black and ethnic minority lost more learning than in comparison to their white counterparts. And I think that's really important. So white children lost around possibly 3 months, whereas the Black children and Asian children were losing more than 4 to 5 months. And that's based on 2000. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'm going to Professor Anastasia for the second part of Telina's question.
Telina, I said that in the context of scientific work and academia. I will reply to you in this context. Unpaid work, it's not only for married women. We have single mothers, we have divorced mother, we have many. It's not only married women. It's any kind of woman in any state that has to raise children, and this takes very much time of the academic scientific work. And I say unpaid because imagine they have, during the COVID, they had sometimes in university, I mean, your salary or your payment, it's according to your achievement or scientific work. So it's scientific outcomes. If your scientific outcomes decrease, then you are less paid. In the same time, you do work at home that is not paid. So I will focus on this or some of these issues, how the university have to face this kind of things. Okay, but preliminary. But I cannot speak in general. I speak about this scientific production that has an impact as well on the payment of the salary of women, which is not the same for men, because a man who can work and can have scientific output, if he's not responsible for children or for elderly, then can progress very much in the career in the university and can have bigger salary there. This is what I wanted to say with a paid work and less salary in the university if we don't have many scientific outcomes.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another hand raised, Mrs. Thavam. Can I invite you to make your question briefly? Unmute your mic, Mrs. Thavam. Mrs. Thavam, can you hear me? We are waiting for you to ask the question. You've raised your hand. Okay. Okay, since there is no response from Mrs. Thavam, although her hand is raised, I just want to make one quick comment, particularly Tilina, who made her comment, as well as to Professor Tudor about the stereotyping and about girls not being able to climb trees. I mean, I just, I'm a bit amazed about that, in the sense that we would expect, if all things go well, for girls and boys and everybody to be able to access online teaching using devices and internet, seated at a table, on a chair, in the comfort of their homes. I don't think we would want any one of our children to have on roof, on tree, on mountain, instead of online. I don't think any one of us want that. So I think this tragic situation, particularly in Sri Lanka, and there may be other countries as well, I'm not very sure, where the desperation of the kids and their parents to access some form of education drives them to on-tree, on-mountain, on-roof education, to me is completely unacceptable. And I don't think we could take that in the context of gender stereotyping, because ideally, everybody, every single child should have transited seamlessly from school when they were ousted into online education in a house with a tablet or a laptop, seated at a desk or a chair, not climbing roofs. That's just a personal opinion. Just want to find out whether there are any more hands raised. We have about 8 minutes more for this round.
Tara,
comments?
Can I complement something on this that you said? Climbing trees, sometimes we're obliged to climb trees in some areas because the internet, it's not stable. So we need, or it's interrupted. So you go there up, maybe you think that you are, you can have easier access. So we need, I mean, from local governments, from government care for this as well. It's, there are things to think that what our governance and how our state can do for this.
Thank you. Right. Then can we close the first round of discussion with thanks very much for the participants who asked the question, for making their questions brief, ditto for those who responded. Now I'm moving on to the second round, where I'm anyway again going to ask the three panelists to make their inputs. Oh, we have one hand raised, Nimal Munasinghe, a bit late in the day, but never mind, Mr. Nimal. Please, can you go ahead?
Okay, madam. I want to tell you that I'm a teacher in Trincomalee district. Is a rural area. There are that she said, of course, I couldn't remember her name. I mean, that is because, you know, why that those areas there are elephant conflict has been, because, you know, the poor signal, there are no any facilities those areas like a Servilla. Then my school is Devatta Mahavidyalaya. There are nearly less than 500 students are there, but there are lack of resources unavailable. The problem is there, she said, of course, has to go here and there, that signal and this thing. But anyway, in a small forest, there are, I mean, that is, you know, that madam, like elephants, like, you know, that there is area, because those are the people who are the do for the agriculture. Mainly agriculture, as well as there are some, you know, I mean, that is snakes and this thing happening as the children, they doesn't know even care with the life, they like enjoyable even this thing. Those are the things I want to point out even there, because, you know, that some are even, you know, that some families are some problem has been there even, you know, that they facing, there might be maybe the father drinking or whatever it is. Some parents are like a mother person might be rowdy as well, whether they came for to school, they're sharing each other, because happy to school even that one, some children as in my class, they directly telling the sir, because you all came there, that's why I come, because I'm very happy only this time, 6 hours might be the school time. That there are the people, there are the students, of course, like in the problem even like this. That's why I want to point at even this. Whether it's a school not there, the pandemic situation, they face like most of the problem even like this.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much,
madam.
Mr. Nimal.
Yes.
You pointed out an extremely relevant and a point that we heard over and over again during the last 18 months. And I'm really appreciative for you to have brought that up. Thank you.
Welcome, madam.
So may I then go into the second round? And with that, I'm going to invite Victoria to make her input. Please keep it to 10 minutes, Victoria. Thank you so much.
I will indeed. May I ask that I have my slides again, but can they start with slide number 14, please? Slide number 14. Slide number 14.
Could you please move the slides to 14 for Victoria's presentation?
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I've got 10 minutes. And I've just put an image here. These are the kind of images that we faced as we went through the 2020 last year. 540 colleagues who had died to COVID-19. And there was a real big feeling that we weren't valued. We're not valued as people in the community. Let's move to the next slide. And I wanted to say that to you is because as we were, move to the next slide, please. As we were involved with COVID-19, our country was, no, not that one. Go back again, please. Now the next one, that's it. Thank you. As we were involved with that, we were also facing a government which were making policies which were extremely hostile to minority groups within United Kingdom, especially in England. And that looked at Black and Asian people and what that meant in the midst of the pandemic. So we had all these things going on at the same time. Can you move back to the next slide? Oh yeah, right, sorry, no, leave it there, leave it there. Now, the impact of the pandemic on children and young people, particularly those in Black and ethnic minority families, has been extraordinary. But the voices of many of these young people are yet to be heard. And at the same time this was going on, it was also stark that Black academics, like myself, were having less opportunities to be able to do the research in these areas. So there was many letters, a couple of open letters were sent to research councils, the United Kingdom's Research Council, saying that, you know, we can't understand. Out of all the money which had been put forward, millions of pounds had been put forward to conduct research, not one single project was given to any Black researchers. And why was this? The majority were given to white men, and the second lot were given to white women, but none to Black men or women. Move to the next slide, please. Move to the next slide, please. Image there. This is a frustration of a young Black child, Black woman, a girl, who's already kind of feels, you know, they've had enough. That was the image. Looking at the home environment, Black and non-white people in general tend to live in neighborhoods that have a high prevalence of virus, and even the staff who work in these facilities are more likely to live in these neighborhoods. It's about location, size, and more than anything else. Let's move to the next slide, please. The challenges that we faced as Black women was the lived experiences, which I've mentioned already previously. Family deaths, mental health, domestic violence, and the volatility of home and work situation. Those all coming together was a lot of pressure, an absolute lot of pressure, which we were now having to deal with. Can I move to the next slide, please? What I want to spend a little bit of time on is this one. One of the participants put their hand up and asked about this. Intersectionality is something which I specialize in, looking at the discussion and the argumentation around women and the inclusion of Black women within the concept of what we are saying about women. Black women themselves were dealing with this strong Black woman syndrome, where we become, where it's perceived that we are so resilient, that we're made of strength only, and that we cannot tire. And it's been bred into Black women that we have to be strong all the time. But it's a trap. It's a trap because we suffer in silence. We suffer in silence, and so we internalize the pain. And that's something which has taken place in large amounts within COVID for young girls and young women within education. I am, as an academic at UCL, I've dealt with so many young Black women and women which are not white, mainly international, and trying to cope with their anguish and experiencing depression and mental health in all different forms, either being away from their parents, whether it's in the international or the UK, whichever it is, and at the same time, being at an elite establishment to be able to achieve. That in itself really, really has taken its toll. The need for face-to-face has been so much required and needed. And yes, online has a place, but it doesn't have a place for face-to-face. And my students and many other students are realizing that, because they were lonely, isolated, depressed, longing for someone to talk about the subject they were wanting to do, not able to go to the library. So everything was online, and it was really, it became a nightmare for these young people, and they're still suffering from it now. I spent many hours, which were lengthened to my day, to ensure that my students, one, were able to achieve, but two, were also able to feel that they got something beneficial from what I was trying to give them in my sessions as well. Doing the research online, that was also something which was very, very difficult to do. It was okay to do for certain aspects, but we miss out on a lot of stuff. Can we move on to the next slide, please, before I wrap up? I think this is a really nice image. And when we think about the first image I put on of the swan, and I put this here. I live near the forest. I'm fortunate enough to live by the forest. And so a lake like this is where I live, very near to me. And I think it is time to reflect. It's time to reflect on the impact COVID had on Black women. We had discussions, and many of you would have had the same kind of discussions, where in the beginning, very affluent families felt this was the real life now, being able to home tutor their children, be able to be home with their partners and work from home in the we had a lovely weather in 2020. From March right up until the end of the year, it was very nice weather. Who could dream for more to work with home with your partner and homeschool your children? For many, that was not the case. That was not the case. And hence the overcrowding, the lack of access to IT, pictures of young people sharing a mobile phone to be able to do lessons for 4 or 5 children in their household. At the same time, the parents also trying to go online, or the parents leaving the children because they've got direct service types of jobs, which means that they haven't got the luxury of sitting in their household. All those things became very stark indeed, very stark indeed. And the conversations talking to women about that, particularly Black women, were quite harrowing, very, very harrowing indeed. This move to the last question, last piece here. Oh no, just leave the last question, and I'll leave that to you now to move on to the next person. I hope that's my 10 minutes. Is that my 10 minutes?
Yes, thank you so much for stopping exactly at 10. Thank you very much. Victoria, to reflect on the impact. I think that's a good way to pause. I'm now inviting Professor Tudor. Please take over for your next intervention. Just a 10-minute intervention, please, Professor.
Thank you very much. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm trying to, in this particular slot, I'm trying to summarize available statistical information about digital access for school children in Sri Lanka to the extent possible. This is actually a female to male ratio in tertiary education in Sri Lanka from 2010 to 2019 based on University Grants Commission data. As you can see, actually the male to female ratio is quite favorable for females in the higher education system. For instance, if you take 2010, for every male student in the higher education system, there were 1.44 females. And it declined a little bit in subsequent years, but in 2019, it increased to 1.38. So this shows that actually there are a lot of female students in the higher education system. And this is actually more easy to understand in faculty-wise distribution of basically female percentage in undergraduate student population. It is as high as 78%. This data, of course, a little dated, 78% among our students, and very high among law students, 84%. For most other subjects, it's over 50%, agriculture 64%. Only in the engineering faculty, it is significantly less. It's about 18%, but in all the other faculties, actually the situation with regard to female enrollment has actually increased over the years. And this is some information about registered Facebook users in Sri Lanka in 2019. Now here by age group, blue is girls or women and red is men. Now you can see that in every age group, actually social media use is much higher among females. Now, for instance, if you take 25 to 34 group, among females, it's about 23.5% as compared to 12.5% for males. And this seems to be the case in all the age groups. So this is something that we have to bear in mind about internet access by gender. And this is information regarding access to devices in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh based on Learned Asia study in 2020. Now here you can see the percentage of households owning TVs, smartphones, and internet access in 2018. As you can see, TV access in Sri Lanka is really high, 91% compared to 56% in Bangladesh. Smartphone access is 46% in Sri Lanka compared to 21% in smartphone in Bangladesh. And internet access, I think this was what was referred to Tara earlier. Sri Lanka internet access is about 32% across the board as compared to 11% in Bangladesh. So we appear to be a little bit better compared to Bangladesh, but this is still not very satisfactory when we talk about, online education in the country. This is actually a picture from an Asian Development Bank publication, which shows how actually devices are shared among different children. In this instance, of course, 2 boys. This is probably pre-pandemic because I don't see any social distancing or wearing of masks. But anyway, this is a pattern that is very common in Sri Lanka, and also many other countries. Now, with regard to policy options, in Sri Lanka, now there are several, actually the authorities have tried several systems to find out which works in Sri Lanka, given the, internet access and also device availability at the household level. There is an internet-based program called eTaksalawa. I think this is conducted by the Ministry of State for Education. And that basically tries to educate school children through internet. And then there's a TV-based program called Guru Gedara, which is actually basically presenting lessons through television. And also there's a radio-based Guru Gedara. Now, what the observers have said is that, the TV-based and radio-based programs are much better in terms of providing access to girls. Because if it is internet-based and devices are used, that actually sometimes the discriminatory impact of access to limited devices at the household level will come into play. So people who have reviewed these different strategies, actually they have proposed a kind of blended approach, where multiple strategies are used, and that is better for a country like Sri Lanka until internet access is, provided on a much more wider basis, and also plans for reopening schools in Sri Lanka. And this relates to our basic challenge. And there is some information about number of school days which operated actually last year. Altogether, there was to be 210 school days in the school system in Sri Lanka in 2020, but only 62 school days were held due to lockdowns and various other restrictions. So that is why the education system has to switch to the Zoom mode. There are 5,000 schools out of 10,100 schools in the country with less than, I think, 200 student population. And the government actually plans to initiate, basically initiate the opening up these schools, because with 200 or less than 200 children, it would be easier to, arrange for social distancing. And also the government anticipates that these less than 200 student schools are mostly in the periphery, like what one of our participants mentioned. So that will actually help people who have limited internet access, both boys and girls. And the Telecommunication Regulatory Authority in Sri Lanka, which actually has information about digital access, says that it plans to provide internet access to about 1,170 schools by the end of this year. And they're actually seeking funding from different sources to implement this program. Finally, with regard to recommendations, overall recommendations from my side, need for gender responsive education during the pandemic. Gender responsive in the sense that, looks at or try to understand how to try to respond to the problems faced by both boys and girls in the education system, and provide, information needed. And the need for gender segregated data on the pandemic. And right now, actually school censuses are being conducted regularly in our schools, but unfortunately, much of the published data, especially with regard to the earlier point about learning losses due to the pandemic, is not available in a gender segregated manner. So perhaps this is also something that needs to be addressed in future censuses. I think the biggest challenge facing now is bringing girls back to school, girls and boys, but there is a kind of concern that a lot of girls who lost schools during the past 2 years, including this year, will not, perhaps they will be reluctant to come back to school, especially if households have to make a choice between boys and girls with limited resources available. So one of the challenges would be to actually facilitate the recovery or the readmission into the school system, both boys and girls, in the remote areas as well as in the rest of the country. And also one of the important things to respond to this, one of the possible remedies for this would be the role of vaccination for teachers and school children. For teachers is already started, and for school children also, government plans to introduce a vaccination program pretty soon. I think that will be really helpful in terms of facilitating gender-sensitive education in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tudor. I'm going to straight away go to Professor Anastasia.
Okay, I'm ready. You asked me to post the question. I'll try to do that. Just a moment to find where I have them. Yes. I will post the question in chat for everybody.
Could you also repeat the question, or rather mention
yes,
the question?
I put to everybody now, and you can see it here, and I repeat. So the question is, as you can see in chat, how the current pandemic perpetuates existing gender injustice, whether this can be mitigated through new caring social norms and soft leadership, and how many of these shifts which have been forced through by the pandemic will sustain and reshape how we operate over the long term. So I will reply to this question, but focusing on my domain, which is university and academia. Yes. As we know and we understand, universities are responsible for supporting faculty members teaching for more effective student learning and for a high quality of education. This is a must for university. This is the responsibility of university. And there the question comes whether the university can care for the well-being of half of the population, which are women and girls. And if we can use empathy, reason, and solidarity, these values in higher education, this is very important, which means a shift in the way that we're doing. The most important is, that's why I mentioned before that if girls climb or boys climb in the trees, does not matter if they're girls or boys. What is matter is that the government, they don't have their optic fibers and networks in this area. They have to do that. So governments and higher education institutions must consider as well the gender inequalities dimension, which we have seen very clearly now with the COVID, and to do efforts and take gender sensitive measures, short-term and long-term, for not reproducing them in the future. So we need strategies on this, and I will be very concrete, and I will describe what we do in Europe now and what we do now in the Mediterranean countries of Europe, because we are more delayed than the northern countries. But we are obliged now from the European Commission mandate that every university, every single university must have a gender equality plan. And to do so, and to oblige university to do so. No university with no gender equality plan cannot apply for funding by the European Commission and Europe for funding for research and innovation. This is very strict. This is very serious, but this obliges all universities to go towards a gender equality plan, as we do in my university. Of course, this is the case of Europe. As speaking about Mediterranean region, where I am entitled to speak as the vice president, I say that the other North African countries or Islamic countries, they don't have this obligation. But working and collaborating in a network with the European, you know, the domino effect is very, very important. They are inspired to do the same. Not all of them, but many, they are inspired to do the same if the leadership is inspired and can see, vigilant and can see the inequalities and sensible. So we ask from governments and university to take short-term and long-term strategies for men and women equality and more gender equality and inclusion in higher education institutions. Because to this, the governance of university of higher education institution, it's a key element for being a driver of change. That's why I speak about leadership and soft leadership. And soft leadership in university and government means that they have the characteristic of courage, of compassion, of collaboration, of understanding, of understanding the inequalities, of doing things for the more vulnerable. So university leaders must ensure that the gender perspective, it's not forgotten when it comes to making important decisions during and after the crisis. And to find ways to mitigate impacts of the future distant learning to women and inequalities at the different levels. So I suggest here some concrete measures that any university, any government has to take. Addressing family responsibilities, included family care leaves and institutional support for child and elder care, leaves of faculty members for child and elder care. But we need our university to include this kind of leaves there. We need to design paid parental leave scheme for both men and women. And this has to be taken first by the government and then by the university, because we need this. We need long-term investment in gender equality and to prepare budget for this, because without some budget, we cannot do things. So we are asking from governments to prepare budgets for a gender perspective toward a more inclusive world. For universities specifically, we need to ensure that women academic output is not disproportionately affected by COVID, and more importantly, to safeguard women's career trajectories. And every university should create an academic community in which all members are treated equally, while family care concerns are regarded as legitimate and important. We need a more responsive climate for integrated work and family responsibilities in the faculty members and researchers. We need more flexible work-family arrangement, policies there in the university, flexibility. We need support in terms of maternity leave, as I said before, and care facilities. Sometimes we need kindergartens at the university. We need equal pay parental leave, as I said before. We need to stop the tenure clock for mothers in the university, because time passes, mothers, they have to keep this unpaid work with children and elderly at home, and then they don't advance their career. And as I said before, advancing our career, we're advancing salary, we're advancing economic benefit. So we have in the university, we must in university look at this to stop the tenure clock for faculty members with children under a certain age. To control gender bias, this can be done by defining and addressing structural, implicit, and unconscious bias in universities. To amplify women voices, it is important. It is important to amplify the voice of women. with established rector in academia to collect data. It's very important to start from this because we cannot make a plan then in university if we don't have data. So we need to create a gender equality plan for each university, which will be a manifesto, will be a statement of the university. And this will include sensitive measure at any level, promoting governance, career development, community life, everything. And finally, we need to create students group for learning gender equality. We have to work with this. We have to work with the young people and to create the groups and teams to work on this. And to work on this in parallel with sustainability learning. So gender equality plans are very important for each university, which are content-wise and cover some areas that I give you some representative areas: work balance in the organizational culture, gender balance in leadership and decision-making, gender equality in recruitment and career progression, integration of the gender dimension in the research and teaching content, measures against gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. These are the most important issues that the gender equality plan of each university has to include. So we need to go toward changes, structural changes, not only cultural. And this is very important. Only with this, only if we do this at governmental and university institutional level, then we can mitigate these disruptions, and then we can really learn from lessons, we take lessons from this crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for stopping exactly on 10 minutes. Before I just open up the question round, second round, I just want to ask one quick question from Professor Tudor. In one of his slides, he mentioned the Facebook access in Sri Lanka, females versus males. I'm just wondering whether I got the statistic right or wrong. It looked like a huge disparity where the male accessibility or usage of Facebook was much higher than females, but you mentioned something different. Could you kindly clarify that for me before we start the questions, Professor Tudor?
Thank you very much, Tara. But that's not correct, actually. It's not the case that social media access is higher among males. It is the other way around, based on this data. And this is actually based on the National Regulatory Authority data that I mentioned earlier. So females use social media much more than males. So this is a key point that we have to bear in mind. And that's what I showed. The blue is for female and the red is for male.
Okay, I think I saw the blue as male, but that's okay. If that's yes, the position, that's all right. I just thought I wanted to clarify that from you. Thank you. So we are now going to open the floor for questions. Please make your questions brief. Raise your hand. We have 15 minutes starting now. So 5 past 4, we will stop the questions and then go back to the final wrap up for each participant. Dr. Kanchana.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Tara. I actually wanted to just add to what Professor Tudor presented. Actually, the numbers at the undergraduate level, the representations in terms of the different faculties, arts, law, medicine, and general science seems to be, quite, privileging the female. But actually, the issue for Sri Lanka is how they actually get sort of, this reality changes altogether when they come to the postgraduate level, and also when it comes to professional development, and also in advancing their academic careers in particular. We see that the statistics are really very glaring, evidence of the advancement being stagnated. And that is the scenario for Sri Lanka. So I just wanted to add to what Professor said. Thank you.
May I just ask a question on that? So you said the advancement is stagnated. How do you see that in the COVID era? Did you see a difference in the 2020-2021 period from before, or was it the same? Because assuming that 2020 March onwards, there was almost a seamless transition to online learning for academics, females or males.
Actually, what I have observed, I have not really done any research, any concrete, research to sort of, it will be based on the experience that I have. Actually, I do see that there's a huge overlap of the duties that the, females have to perform at home and the academics in terms of their publications, although it seems like as a very, a very bona fide, scenario for us right now, being stuck with the family and, having the family around us, time for merrymaking, that kind of thing. But the reality is that actually we find it really hard to get to our research work, especially during this time, because we are really struggling with managing the space because of so much coincidence, like, how everything coincides on top of each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchana. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. Mr. Anton Piratna again. Yes, Mr. Anton, please.
Thank you for giving this opportunity, and it's really interesting presentation and panel discussion. My concern is that when we discuss gender, we cannot locate it in isolation. It is really interconnected, ethnicity, class, religion, various dimensions. So I hope for us to understand holistic dimension only possible when we are linked gender with other social stratification systems that we have in our societies. Thank you.
I think that's the kind of point that Victoria also made in her initial presentation. It was not just gender, but there was a huge association with the ethnicity involved, and that's how the Black Swan description was brought forward. Yes, thank you, Anton. I do appreciate your point. Any other questions?
If I can say something here, if you allow me. Yes, Anton has right. Then the national context, the cultural context, this is very important, very much as well, along with the intersectional context. But the national context that includes religion, culture, social level, and everything, it's very important as well when we consider all this measure.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks very much. Tilina Madibala, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, this question is to Professor Anastasia. I'm actually currently a postgraduate student in Gender and Women's Studies in Colombo University. I'm particularly interested in how trade unions can play a role in recognizing women academics' unpaid care work and also addressing sexual harassment at academic institutions, because you brought up these recommendations, like several very interesting recommendations. And we in Sri Lanka also have a trade union called FUTA, Federation of University Teachers Association. But I'm wondering, because I'm also like studying how these trade unions are sort of raising feminist demands in terms of bringing gender equality. So I would like to know what your ideas are about the role of trade unions.
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I will give you a reply to you by giving you an example that we replicate now in Greece, and that was the example of Norway. This center that I mentioned, that a member that the government has created, Innovation for Women, regroups and integrates in collaboration all the trades and all associations of women, where they express their, all these needs, and they try to make strategies in collaboration with the government or the institutions or universities or trade. So you need this kind of collaboration of structures to do. And then when you have this network, all players in the country, then we can discuss really, and you can go forward for new strategies. But you need the top-down help as well in this, which is governance of institution of universities, and trades as well, and association, and business as well, and companies. So we have this, and we call Center for Women Innovations. And this is really based on Norway example that they do this and they go very well. I don't know if it's enough for you. This.
Thank you.
Can I add to it, Tara?
Yes, please go ahead, Professor.
I think, Tilina, what you ask is a very important question, especially about the trade unions. You know, like in Sri Lanka, most of the trade unions are also male-dominated, just as much as the politics in general. So much so that if you take the nurses trade union, which has a vast majority of female caregivers in the profession, but actually some of the leaders are male. Perhaps the most important leaders are male. So this is a characteristic of most trade unions. I would say it will go for even the so-called radical trade unions. Now, of course, I'm not commenting on FUTA because I have also been a member of that. And I don't want to specifically comment on FUTA, but you have to look at how, gender stereotypes. And I want to come back to that point earlier because Tara didn't agree with my statement about stereotype earlier. Actually, what I suggested is not what should happen, but what is happening at the moment. I am not prescribing that girls should climb trees to get access to internet, but girls should learn how to climb trees. That is my position, irrespective of this issue. So anyway, my point is that gender is about, it's a socially constructed entity, and that in that social construction, a lot of different players take part in it, and whatever that is socially constructed can also be unconstructed. So this is where female workers, especially teachers, for instance, 70% of teaching profession is female, as I told you, but look at the trade union movement. So there is a need for unconstructing the currently unfair representation in the trade union movement as well.
Can I say something to do here? So yes. You need, as I understand, you need models, role models there in the country. But we have to take in mind that this change we have to do with men together, because not only women have to change, men have to change as well. So we don't need only a center or a structure where there are only women discussing this, but we need really inspired men to be there and to take the change, so we can collaborate together. I agree that in all these trades there are men there, but maybe there are some men that are more inspired, or women. They can do efforts from down up, from bottom up. We can go, in parallel, top-down strategies and bottom-up activities in order to really boil all this change, I think. But you need role models there as well of women, or successful women in any sector.
Yeah, thank you, Anastasia. Any other questions from the participants? We have about 5 minutes more for the second discussion round. Okay, so if there aren't any further questions on that round, we could then move straight into the final round. This is actually a wrap-up and we will not have any discussion after this round. So these will be the final comments that I'm going to invite our 3 speakers one by one to present. I would like to just start this round by just focusing on policy making, focusing on what governments need to do. Anastasia has set the stage very well for that. She referred to that in her second round. The UNCTAD Acting Secretary General a few months ago, March 2021 to be exact, Isabel Durant said, as policymakers urgently try to restart their economies, they should ensure that both women and men receive the necessary support and means to recover from this current crisis. And that is to achieve an inclusive and a better recovery policy. And in order to get a more inclusive, better recovery policies, invariably they need to be gender sensitive. So in this final round, I would like to invite the 3 speakers to give me maximum of 3 areas that they think they should recommend as concrete policy suggestions to their respective governments, policymakers, and authorities in terms of mitigating or minimizing gender inequalities and ensuring that women's post-COVID recovery keeps a pace with that of the men in an equitable manner, so that we don't have any disparities in the recovery phase when we are all struggling to emerge from it. So can I have just a maximum of 3 points that you would like to make as recommendations to the authorities and the policymakers, starting with Victoria?
Okay, so the bench isn't too high then for me, is it? Okay, yeah, challenge. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say, this is not one of my 3, is it is a time to reflect. And I think that is really, really important. A time to reflect and reset the button on these couple of things. One, I would say it is important to understand the experiences of Black girls and Black women within many countries, but particularly I'm talking about my country regarding the United Kingdom. And I say that because we need to address stereotypes. That becomes as one, addressing the stereotypes and misconceptions which surround young Black women and young Black girls. That's I think the first one. Second one is also to really acknowledge the lived experiences of Black communities. And if you haven't got Black, if you don't use the word Black, minorities within countries. And the lived experiences is real. So instead of having policies that are hostile towards those minorities which live in your country, that needs to be really looked into and acknowledge what is actually going on and what you benefit from those particular people. And I think the final one, which I think is really important, is and I don't know how to wrap this up as a point, because I think it's about the kind of aesthetic aspect of what is pleasing to the eye. So we have a lot of there's a lot of discussion and pain along with isolation. When we look at shadism, and the eye of the beauty and what that means. And so much of the colonialism has really put people against each other. So we have this ongoing looking at how dark your skin is. So if you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, well, then you stick around. And if you're Black, don't come back. So this whole push towards kind of privilegedness and what whiteness does. And I think that is something which, if you readdress and you look at your policies and you assess your policies, what communities are actually benefiting within your country? Is it white? Is it the whiter? So somebody who is adhering to be white, And is it the ones which are at the bottom where their shadism is taking place? And I think that's something, if we start to look at that, I think we could have some significant changes. And also, as Anastasia said earlier, I think a discussion which never gets done within academia is about single parents who are academics. I'm a single parent and I'm an academic. No one talks about that. Instead, it's always about the research about those people, but not actually inviting those people around the table who are actually academics and doing the work. It's always about the other as a research participant. And I think that's what I want to say. Hopefully that helps answer the question, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You were extremely precise, and that really sets the tone for the others. Thank you very much. Professor Tudor, over to you, please.
I'm afraid I cannot be as precise as Victoria. Nevertheless, I will make an attempt. One point I want to mention is that this digitization of education that we are seeing during the past 2 years, it has its good aspects and bad aspects. One of the good aspects is like what we are doing right now, getting people from various countries with common interest to come and talk. And this is something that has to continue in spite of the end of the pandemic. So I believe that, especially school curriculum should take this into account. And, when we had to confront the pandemic, we were not ready for it. And we had not actually, educated children in advance, and parents didn't have money or time to buy devices needed. So now we are in a better position. I feel that, we should continue to take advantage of digital media, both boys and girls. I think that's one very important point I want to mention. And my second point is actually about reflective education. And I think this also came from Victoria's idea that, the education, through the education process in schools and in the universities, we should reflect on our experiences. Now, we have had once in a lifetime experience for anybody during this pandemic, experiencing all risks, lockdowns, shortage of goods and all that sort of thing. And in the education curriculum, I think we should have introduced perhaps a new component, not only in arts and social sciences, I would say engineering, medicine, architecture, all those subjects, because, this is a way in which actually we can introduce a little bit of social sciences actually to people in other disciplines as well. So I strongly feel that that's a component that has to come in, a reflective educational experience where we actually not only thinking about how we face the problem, how we address it, what problems we had, and what can be done to collectively get out of this crisis, including the discriminatory policies and programs that were introduced. So that is point number 2. Point number 3 is actually about the need for research. I think, during the pandemic, we could not do most of the research because research itself was problematic from a, health safeguard point of view. We could not talk to people. We could not get feedback from people. So hopefully when the pandemic is over, we are in a better position to get more reliable information about gender and gendered experiences during the education system during the pandemic. And I think we should take advantage of it when the time comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Tudor. Anastasia?
Okay. I will stress the importance on sustainability and sustainable development goals. And I connect my 3 points with this. all around the globe, all governments or societies who are committed, and we are speaking about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which is how to develop an equitable, sustainable, sustainable societies for the future. So most of the governments, most of us, most of the communities, most of the societies, most of the institutions that are committed to Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, but in the Sustainable Development Goals, there is another goal, 7, that is for women and girls. So if someone, and this is what I use in the Mediterranean countries and in the Mediterranean universities where are male dominated, to reply to Tudor and to other questioners, then this is really an argument. If you're committed, you say that you're committed to Sustainable Development Goals, and now with COVID, we realize that the first sustainable goal has to be, for me and for many others that we look about soft leadership and soft governance, has to be the well-being and the health, any kind, physical, mental, any societal, any kind of health. This has to be the first. Then if we're committed there, where then we are reluctant with the Sustainable Development Goal 5. So connecting to this, I connect all my points. And I say, first, any effort to mitigate the socio-economic cost of COVID-19 needs to take the path of sustainability and Sustainable Development Goals or sustainable development, and gain the lost ground in gender equality. Second, any absence of gender lens can dilute the efficacy of efforts for sustainable development, sustainability and resilience, and decrease the societal impact and the benefits in science and innovation as well. And third, since we are in academic, since I'm more dealing with science and innovation, scientific expertise, knowledge and innovation from all genders are essential to build diverse, inclusive universities and societies. So these are my 3 points connected to Sustainable Development Goals commitment.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, for that very precise focus on the SDGs in your final comments. So ladies and gentlemen, as promised, we have wound up exactly at 4:15. We started at 1:45. Commitment was to stop at 4:15 Sri Lankan time, and we have done it. So I'm really happy and really thankful to the 3 panelists who gave a stellar performance, as well as our participants. I just want to, before I pass the platform on to Kanchana for her final remarks, I just want to say that let's all be thankful to COVID. It's a very strange thing to say, to be thankful to COVID for exposing, although harshly and very brutally, certain things that we may never have been exposed to. We may never even would have talked at a platform like today. It has exposed vividly the discrimination. It was discrimination, men versus women, minorities versus majorities, shadism, as Victoria said. So it exposed so much of discrimination. And I think it's not just common to the UK or the United Kingdom, UK or to the United States or to Sri Lanka. I think it is across most parts of the world. So discrimination exposure. Second is it exposed the inequities and inequalities in terms of education. And here I'm referring to higher education, and we saw it from all the discussions that we did today. It also busted the misconceptions and myths that we all had fine access to internet, fine access to devices. No, not even the highly developed countries, rich countries like the US, had huge gaps in access to internet, and not so much the poorer countries like Sri Lanka. So it busted those myths and misconceptions. I'm really thankful to COVID for that. So COVID made us actually think, reflect, like you all said, and also gave us a huge opportunity to understand lots of realities in life. Not that I'm wishing for another COVID, but I'm really wishing we could take these lessons home. So thank you all very, very much. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kanchana.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tara, and all the panelists. Actually, I have housekeeping announcements to make this request from the participants. Please stay till the end of this session where all the acknowledgements are made. To the team of, there was a huge team of people behind this entire endeavor, and we need to duly thank them. So let me start out by saying, well, we did it, and I am extremely happy. And also, I would like to quote the message that I actually sort of am taking more broadly, is that COVID offers us not only the negative experiences, but there is a huge opportunity that it has offered us that has to be unearthed, and we have to find it. So with that remark, let me deliver my vote of thanks very quickly, because there is a host of people who have helped me to make this successful. So first and foremost, for a very enlightening, enthralling discussion that has been conducted here with the participation of these eminent academics, professor from overseas, especially may I first actually include them and prioritize them, Professor Anastasia from Greece, and also Associate Professor Victoria, and also Professor Tudor Silva and Dr. Tara DeMel for all your contributions. I really acknowledge your support very deeply. Thank you. So I first and foremost thank all the panelists for their invaluable contribution to this discussion and their commitment to this event, and for gracing the Open University Research Conference, Research Sessions 2021 with their participation. A very special vote of thanks should be extended to Dr. Tara DeMel for her very resourceful pool of contacts and liaising with me, my requests, my questions, my queries with pleasant friendliness and ease at all times. May I also extend a very deep vote of gratitude to Professor Shyama Veerakoon, the conference chair, for making this session a possibility even at very short notice, encouraging me and supporting me with the idea of a panel of this panel discussion of this nature. I thank the conference organizing committee for their help and support, especially to Dr. Utpala, Dr. Lahiru, and the technical team consisting Dr. Hemika, Mr. Tennakoon, and Ms. Wanoji. Last but not least, to all the colleagues, students, and participants for being here and gracing this occasion. Thank you very much. Stay safe and stay happy. Thank you.